the software, I don't believe the exact adopted budget that was voted on. So next year, I have a solid point in time, the exact budget that was reported on. And that will stay, so all adjustments will be very clear too, so it'll be very easy to justify it. And that helps us with budgeting. Why did we budget there and need to adjust? Is this a trend? So I let some of these lines come in. One of the lines I'll draw your attention to is Don brought up at the last meeting, in district tuition. A lot of people didn't know this, but we had a blanket PL for Project Promise, $40,000 came out of contracted services. I don't know if that was budgeted for, but it was certainly brought in and it was spent before I even got here. So these are some of the items that I think need to be clear. We brought that down, looking at encumbrances of monies we didn't spend, we brought that number down to about 8,000 over budget right now. So even since this report was made. So as we get closer to the year, we're scrubbing through all our open purchase orders, making sure that it's not over encumbering. We looked through all our utilities and so on, but I did not make adjustments for these accounts. Looking at our bottom line, it's very easy to stay within budget, so it gives me a good idea going into the next budget cycle of where we could improve some of our budgeting.
Have questions for Mike?
I was just going to ask about the teacher contingency. Seems low?
I think it's more, if you look at it, salaries, they usually, and I won't speak for this budget because I didn't really create this one, but you know your HR, you should be very close to exactly what you need. So as you go into the summer months, you have some hiring, you should be within a certain limit. Knowing that you also have a large health contingency as well, 100,000 with this size staff is not too bad. And generally when you're looking at new hires, you budget for like a family plan. You budget somewhere mid-tier. I know in even our budgeting process, you saw that we weren't looking for the lowest step, right? And then if we hire some new teachers at lower steps, we save money. So typically you don't need a whole lot of contingency in that line unless you have extreme turnover. So and when it's taxpayers' money, you want to be very careful to how you budget for a contingency, right? So I don't think that's a bad idea, and clearly we didn't use it. We're falling well short. If anything, you might want to consider, as we get better at looking at these numbers, we should be closer to, at the most, 1% to 5%, 1% of your budget. So I think we have too much money left over in a budget like this.
Ben?
Yeah, just because these are format a little bit different than some of the budgets that I've worked with. The 530, 576 at the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Is that operations to 6/30 of 2014 plus punching out this priority list? Is that the remaining balance on 6/30 of 14 after all of that?
No, because that's the remaining balance of looking at expenditures as of the date this report was written. And I believe, some items that also are still, like, I would say we still have purchases for supplies. We still have some software obligations too that were not encumbered. So when we look at the main report, that encumbrance column of 2.5 million, those are expenditures that still remain that we're paying out through June 30th. There are, in addition to that, some supplies that are being purchased that were not encumbered, possibly like $40,000 in supplies across the board that may or may not be expended, but I leave those open. So as they're looking at, what's needed in cleaning up classrooms and whatnot, they still have some leeway. So is 530,000 absolutely going to be the number to apply to fund balance? Or actually, in this case, we know our fund balance is pretty significant. So a lot of that would go back to the taxpayers.
But I guess my point was, it is the projected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Give or take.
I would say
that's $530,000 to continue running the school district for the next 30 days.
Right, no.
Is the
Exactly.
530,000, does the retained fund balance of $350,000 get added to the 530?
So the DRA, we had the same conversation right during the budget season. What you get to keep, I believe it was 2% or 2.5%, I have to look it up, of your whole budget. They're gonna come out with that number.
Yeah, but
You have a fund balance which stays there.
But where's
Where's the
the
350?
last year's?
It's in a
That
surplus.
was-
Oh, no, fine. So these are just expenditures. I'm not showing you revenue accounts.
Okay.
I'm not showing you what we would consider in the corporate world equity. Fund balance is your equity for all intents and purposes,
Okay, so the answer is that 530,
not included in this report at all.
The 350.
the 350 is
Oh, yeah. So 350 fund balance is not included here. The
Right.
530 is what could be applied to fund balance up to that level.
Right.
And then the rest would go back to the taxpayer.
or expended.
It could be.
Right, like
You know,
this-
I'm
like
saying
a-
right at the very end of our ability to spend on this budget, if that's the projected, as you just mentioned, that would essentially, we could apply that to the remaining fund balance, and then anything that it's capped at, anything else would go back to the taxpayer.
I'm personally gonna advocate that all that money go back to the taxpayers. The 350,000 and the fund surplus, 530,000, or whatever. it comes out
So
to be.
I think you're reading this report a little bit. What we're looking at this report is you have a $777,000 number. You see that? That's
Yep.
what we have remaining at the moment this report was run.
Yeah,
Then I point out there's a contingency there,
yeah,
so that you can consider that's something that you really shouldn't spend unless it's designated, correct? So if I pull that out, there's still 577,000 remaining.
right.
Then we're looking at a priority list of unexpended funds, which you will discuss in a little
Just
bit.
on item K.
So are you okay with spending that?
No,
That's what
So
we're
you're
discussing.
actually coming up to the 577. So just want to make sure everybody can read this right. The 530 is not before the spending of those funds, it'll be after. So, and if you want the number before, it'd be 577.
Right,
and,
because that's the 46K delta, right?
because there's 199,000 contingency, if that contingency's not used, then it'd be $777,000.
Correct.
And as a reminder too, under H, you'll determine if you want to put up to $60,000 into your capital reserve fund for building maintenance. That would come off of that number
Right,
as
well,
well.
yeah.
Which we talked about, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mike on this as aspect of the correspondence and report? Okay, we'll move on to item 11, old business. First item of old business is approval of the support staff handbook.
So just as a reminder, both the support staff handbook and specialist handbook, that I made a recommendation to the board with some changes in it. You reviewed several meetings ago.
Yeah.
It was a while ago. There's been no changes since that point in time. It is what it was.
So what is the board's pleasure at this point? Do you have a recommendation for the board, Stacy?
I would recommend that you approve them as presented to the board.
No surprise there.
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor made by Sue Jenny of Alexandria to approve the support staff handbook. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jeff Levesque of Groton. Any discussion? Hearing no I'm sorry, Don?
Did the support handbook have their pay schedule in there?
Yeah, I have the proposed one, yes.
So how can we approve it when we haven't approved
You're just approving the schedule,
the schedule?
you're not approving what we landed at for raises, increases, or step changes. You're just approving the schedule, which actually didn't change anyway.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion to approve the support staff handbook, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 6-0-0 with one excuse, that being Danbury. So that was 11 passed. Okay, we now have before you the approval of the specialist handbook. Stacy, do you have a recommendation?
I make a recommendation that you approve the specialist handbook as presented to the board.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the board? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
about to make a motion, presumably that we approve the specialist handbook, is that correct?
That would be correct, yes.
Okay, is there a second?
I would like to second that motion.
And Sue from Alexandria seconds the motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Vote is 6-0-0 with one being excused, that being Danbury. We're now at item 11C, approval of compensation for support staff and specialists. Stacy, do you have a comment?
Yep, so when we were in the budget process, if you recall, the board approved adding $100,000 into the budget to try to kind of fix staffing for support staff, in the sense that we had a lot of staff who had been here for many years, who hadn't gotten increases or moved up in step for many, many years. And so there was a big gap between what step they were on and how many years of experience they had. And that we had been hiring new staff in at higher rates, and so it was the goal of the board to try to kind of fix that problem and to come up with some way to compensate employees who had been here. So I worked with the board on multiple different versions of salary schedules to try to move people up, and the board came to consensus that we would, well, first let me back up and say that we have gone through every single support staff's file and documented years of experience, so it was a consistent method we used. We now have that information as to how many years of experience everybody has in order to work to fix the problem, because once we identified that to put everybody in the correct group and move them up to the correct step was over $200,000, which was clearly far more than we had. We wanted to make sure we addressed and took care of some of the problem, which was trying to get people to the correct step. And so in order to get to that $100,000 and stay within that cap, in general, we took the years of experience that people had, subtracted the step they were on, divided it in half, and so moved everybody up in step to that point in time, rounding down. So some people who have 5 or 6 years of gap will gain at least 2 or 3 years back in step, and we'll see that increase. People who have been on the correct step likely will see no increase next year. If they were on the correct step this year, they likely will see no increase. So we tried to at least close the gap, as I would say, between those people who are further behind. In my discussion with the board is we'll continue to look at that through the budget process for next year and actually come up with what it would cost to really come to another solution, but having time now to be able to do that. We obviously underestimated what the cost would be to actually fix the problem. So.
This was one of those areas that the superintendent and SAU staff uncovered as a result of Mr. Robinson's commentary as a genesis of this, and worked hard to try to come up with a solution to address the fringes that were just way out of whack in terms of balances, and I think that's what we pretty much come to consensus of. And we did so within the $100,000 that was budgeted for this purpose. It's very difficult to do it, and I think this is the recommendation that the superintendent's about to make for the board to consider. Thank you for your hard work on this. It was no easy task, we recognize.
It was a challenge.
I trust that as we get this under control, that we can make improvements for the rest of the personnel through the budgetary process. Is there a recommendation, Madam Superintendent?
To approve the compensation for support staff and specialists as discussed and presented to the board.
And can we identify that matrix in some way, some form or way?
On the information provided to the board, it's titled, no new group, hold on, what's the title? No change in group, halfway to correct step, round down.
Okay. So identifying the proposal as no change in group, halfway to correct step, rounding down. And the handout that was given us for a total of $94,954.39. With some increases by percentage indicated. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Sue moves past that matrix in the amount of $94,954.39, and it's seconded by Christine. Is there discussion? Anyone else have any comments? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. The motion passes 6-0-0 with one excuse, that being Danbury. Again, thank you for your hard work on that, Stacy, and everyone from the SAU as well. Okay, we now are at the section 12, which is new business. And item A is resignation of professional staff. Stacy.
I have 3 resignations to bring forward to the board. I'm bringing forward Ella Brockelman, who's a teacher at the high school, science teacher. Taylor Whipple, who's here at the high school as a math teacher. And Joellen Dyball, who's a district SAU employee as a part-time out-of-district coordinator.
What is the board's pleasure in the resignations?
I move that we accept the resignations.
Motion's been made by Dawn from Hebron to accept the resignations. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Ben from Bristol. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? There's one excuse, that being Danbury. Motion passed 6-0-0. Item B, 12B, nominations of the professional staff. Stacy.
Yep, if I can just add 2 under resignations, just so that the rumor mills don't go out there, we are planning to hire and fill all those positions.
Thank you.
To clarify that, so I know there was a question about the math position, so we are filling those. I'm bringing forward 2 professional staff nominations, both for social studies positions here at the high school. John Lalos will come in at a bachelor's step 1 at $34,370, and Simon Parsons, who will also be social studies, will be a master's step 5 at $40,607.
Thank you. Is there a motion to elect the nominees to the professional staff?
So moved.
Moved by Ben from Bristol. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jeff from Groton. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes with one being excused, that being Danbury. Okay, brings us to 12C, handbook approval. 12CI. Are we going to take both of these together?
I wish you would.
You can, yeah. So the policy committee
I
has,
thought that might be,
the policy committee has vetted both handbooks. These are the last 2 handbooks for approval.
okay.
The handbooks have both been reviewed extensively.
Just looking at all this, we could really get fancy here, and I guess that would be stretching it. Okay, is there a motion to approve the handbooks from item 12C?
I'll move it, make a motion. To
Jeff
approve the
moves
handbooks.
to approve the items in 12C, which are the handbooks for Newfound Memorial Middle School and the Newfound Regional High School, both the parent and student handbooks. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sue. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes 6-0-0 with one being excused, that being Danbury. Okay, item 12D, approval of the Extending Learning Opportunity Compliance Plan.
Ooh, so close, but no, it's the English speakers of other languages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you are kind of close.
I wasn't even near it. I kept
I'll give you credit for being close, okay?
looking at ESOL.
So I would like to thank Ann Holton for all of her work on this. So as we, every year we're required to sign off on, the superintendent is required to sign off on assurances that we have certain practices and policies in place. And this is one of them that we do not have, that we should have had for about 10 years now, that we uncovered we don't have. We called the state, because it actually has to be approved by the state. So we called the state, they don't have one on file for us. So we've been signing off. So Ann worked really hard to try to get this together to get approved by this board so that we could apply for all of our grants for next year.
There's a recommendation from the superintendent to approve this plan. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the plan. This has been reviewed by the policy committee.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Christine from New Hampton. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. One excused, that's from Danbury.
May I ask for a point of order?
Point of order from the audience, I'll recognize that. given you are-
Earlier in the agenda, you approved the modification of agenda. In that approval, you did not approve that you would not do the motion on consent agenda, the motion on individual agenda items. That would be done after public comment on the agenda items.
I'm unfamiliar with this agenda, and
Well, you've had the agenda in front of you. These items are on there.
as a result, I'd like you to explain to me what the significance of that is.
Why should the public be able to comment on things that have already been approved? You're approving them as you go along. You're not using the consent agenda, and you are not doing the motion on individual agenda items.
Well, I think it's widely known what my feelings are on that subject, and therefore we're going to continue with the agenda that has been approved, and we'll allow the public to comment at the time that becomes appropriate, which is item 14, given that this is the published agenda. And thank you for that input.
Does that mean the other votes do not count? That they have to be redone?
I don't understand why it would. Anyone care to comment?
Because the public hasn't had a chance to comment before we voted.
That we so felt like talking about.
Including the items on the agenda, correct?
No.
No.
Well, we
So
don't
you
know
can't
what it
comment
is
on items on the agenda and the public comments.
at the beginning of this.
We don't, well, this has been discussed at past meetings.
Okay, when we brought this up, when I brought it up, I think, or I talked about it at the last meeting, we talked about the first public comments were going to be on any item, including agenda items, but any item. And it was going to be up here towards the front. But then we would have discussion on all the agenda items. And then we would have a second public comment period before we voted on all those agenda items. It's not set up that way, so I can understand your way of doing it. It's not on here like that, but that's what we talked about doing.
The chair, tonight's chair actually mentioned, you can comment on anything your heart desires, which includes every item on this agenda, period.
So during the course of
During the
this-
first public
Yes,
comment.
but to Sue's point, and again, in the IT industry, this was called the Wayne salute.
Mr. Chairman, I think I understand what the issue is. And if I could ask a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Jeff.
First, is there any public comment on anything that we've already covered that should probably be reconsidered? And second, is there anyone planning on commenting on anything we've got going forward so that we can move this meeting along?
until we've heard what's being discussed, we don't know if we will have any comments.
Well, this brings up the change in format to the agenda, and I'm trying to adhere to what's been presented, posted, and published. And to Sue's comment, I think what you say is true. We did agree to do that, but that's not how this is structured.
But if we had taken each of these and put them on the consent agenda, then the public would have a chance to comment before we voted on the consent agenda.
That would be true, but there's no instruction
Well,
here
actually-
on having to put it on the consent agenda, because if there's anything controversial, and we don't know that until we get to each individual item, someone could object to it being on the consent agenda.
It
So that
is.
wouldn't work.
And then they would be voted on under the next item on the agenda
Individual items.
of the individual items.
It says-
15.
It does say, so you're supposed to discuss all these, okay, and then have public comment, and then motion on the consent agenda, and then motion on individual agenda items. So it is set up that way. It just didn't show.
Which comes, all right, so let's come back to my first question being, is there anybody in the public who wanted to comment on stuff that we've already voted on that we should probably reconsider? And then, if we just move forward using the consent agenda, would that be satisfactory to everybody?
Or not?
Well, I know I'm going to vote against an increase in lunches, to answer your question, so I'm not going to let that go on the consent agenda.
And I think it's
Are you
important.
asking for public comment on those
Well,
items that were?
Well, here's the point.
Because I do have public comment on one of the items.
The point is that you can't just plan to put everything on the consent agenda.
That's what I was gonna say, is because some of these really require a motion.
There are two spots here. One is for the consent agenda, and then one is for individual agenda items to vote. So if we were to ask if there were comment, like Jeff said, on anything we've already discussed, and take that comment, and then if we want to reconsider our vote, we can. But then I think we need to discuss the rest of these items, then ask for public comment, then do our votes.
Well, I don't disagree, and that would be, again, I apologize. Unlike with the agenda I am familiar with, this is my first time.
I'm in favor of moving forward, as Sue suggested.
So, I think that's probably a satisfactory suggestion at this point. And we have the option, for those of us that voted in the affirmative, of moving to reconsider if we find that there's public comment on any of the other items that may change our mind, which is the whole purpose of having public comment, in my opinion, before we take action. So we're down at item D, which has been approved, as well as the old business items. And again, my error for not having enforced the approach here, which is to do exactly that, have the discussion, ask for public comment, and then move on to consent agenda, consent agenda items. And then, if there are any to take up individually, like lunches, for example, we can do that subsequently. Everybody okay with that? Okay. So, at this juncture, I guess I would ask, is there any public comment on what we have approved thus far for purposes of allowing the board to reconsider? Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Robinson from Danbury, New Hampshire. On the item of the approval of the compensation for support staff, if I recall properly, the discussion that was involved of putting that as an item on the budget was also to use that as money to be giving raises to the administration. And I was just wondering whether any of that money was actually used for.
You mean the SAU staff?
No, for the administration. You were talking about giving raises to the principals and to like possible 2-3% raises. And so, am I correct that that was part of the conversation at that time when you would put that money in? I know you don't need to answer, but I'm just, so that's, that was the comment that I needed to make. Thank you.
I don't think we've included the admin.
Admin was not included in that.
I think that's a fair question for purposes of reconsideration.
Thank you.
Public comment.
Heather Goff of Bristol.
Heather,
The insurance, I heard there was going to be some compensation with the insurance for the support staff. Is that?
is this public comment on stuff we've already moved on?
Yeah, the compensation. I don't know if that was part of that money or not.
Which item are you referring to? Because this is for purposes of potentially reconsidering.
C,
Old business. 11C,
old business.
under old business.
All business, yeah.
Okay, and your question again?
I heard there was compensation for our insurance, but I didn't know if that was part of that $100,000 or if that was just wages.
Go ahead.
The insurance is budgeted separately, so the premiums, if that's what you're,
No, so your question is did something change in the benefit package for support staff? Nothing changed.
Yeah, this is just wages.
Wages only was that $100,000.
So there was no compensation with insurance?
insurance doesn't, we don't, so the only way someone could technically look at the total compensation package, if we were to change the co-insurance rate, right? Nothing changed in that. So the co-insurance is still exactly what it was distributed in the handbook. There are increases though in insurance costs. We know that we budgeted for those. And in the next year uniquely, there's a slight decrease in insurance costs. But those were budgeted separately away from wages.
Thank you. Anything else, Heather? Okay. So it sounds like no one wants to move to reconsider any of the votes that we've taken under old or new business to item D. Is that correct? Okay. Hearing no desire to reconsider, we'll now take up item 12E, field trip request. Is there a motion to put the field trip request on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay. Without any objection, we'll add that to the consent agenda. It really doesn't have to be a motion, sorry. Moving on to item 12F. First read for policies IHBG, home education instruction, and IICCF, volunteer form and confidentiality form. You have these in your packet. Is there any objection to those forms going on to the consent agenda? Hearing none, those have been added to the consent agenda. Item 12G, approval for the superintendent to hire and accept resignations until the next board meeting. Is there any objection to that action being taken to put on the consent agenda? Hearing none, we'll add that to the consent agenda. Item 12H, approval to transfer up to the sum of $60,000 into the expendable trust fund, building maintenance. Is there any objection to that being added to the consent agenda?
Clarification, I think that should be a motion,
Yeah, because you have to specify.
because you have to specify how much you want us to transfer into the fund.
Therefore, that will be made an individual motion on recommendation of the superintendent. I concur. So the superintendent objects. So do I. Item 12I, setting of lunch prices for 2014-15 school year. Is there any objection besides myself to that going on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Okay, that will be an individual motion.
So we discuss now.
Shouldn't we discuss it? Yes.
Not yet.
No?
No?
But then the public won't have a
Right.
chance.
Okay, I'll tell you what, let's
So,
is there any, let's just continue to see what else goes on, and then we'll take the individual ones for discussion. Is there any objection to approve the tuition rates for the 2014-15 school year, besides my own,
I'd like to have discussion.
okay, individual. There's a priority list for the unreserved fund balance. I'd like to discuss that, but that's not going on the consent agenda. There's a request from NATO, open negotiations. I think that should be an individual motion as well. Or I object to it. Therefore, we have 3 items for the consent agenda. Field trip, first read policies, approval for the superintendent to hire. That brings us back to item 12H, approval to transfer up to the sum of $60,000 into the expendable trust fund. Now, let me ask you a question. We're going to discuss this, but we're going to act on it subsequently, which was the structure of the old format. So after public comment. So let's discuss it, but we cannot take a motion now. We have to take it later under section 15. Is that correct? Anyone concur?
So the approval, in my opinion, should be for the 60,000 when we do make the motion. Not, not anything lower than that, up to the sum, but 60,000.
That's been what we've been putting in
Yeah.
in the recent past.
Expendable trust fund.
Considering the condition of some of our buildings, it's not a bad idea.
In that remember, we're using a large chunk of that next year. You voted to transfer 120,000. So this is that consistent payment. Some years you're not gonna use as much, some years you'll use more.
Right.
So you actually voted, this was a warrant article going into the 2014 budget.
Right.
But it's up to 60,000 at this point in time. So this is essentially, we're at that point in time.
Right, and Sue wants to spend all 60.
Or
No.
you're not spending it,
You wanna save all
transfer it.
60, right, you wanna put it away.
That's a big difference. It's
Set
into
aside.
savings versus spending.
Set aside, I was formulating that.
Because I believe that we will actually have the 60,000 at the end of the year.
We
I guess
shall.
that's why the up to, but pretty
Yeah.
confident in that.
Right. Further discussion on that? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 12I, and we'll take that up individually for action under 15. 12I, setting of lunch prices for the 2014-15 school year. Would someone like to comment on that?
Like, last year, there was some federal regs that you could be in violation of.
Well, each year, we're required now to do a calculation, and you'll notice in my report, I refer to an attachment for the calculator, which somehow did not make it into being attached to this. It's giving an idea of, so our price requirements, they cap it at 10 cents. So we actually should be higher than this, but the most they want us to go per year. And if you remember back, probably around October, don't hold me to that though, we had a discussion about raising prices for the current fiscal year. And there was a motion and vote to postpone that because the year had already started. So now we're at that point again. So we're not asking for the 2014 increase. We're asking both for the 2014 increase of 10 cents and the 2015 increase of approximately that. Now, the recommendation for the program for revenue is to raise it by 25 cents. If you don't, we will make the cuts to come in within budget. It could be bringing staff hours down, it could be not having breakfast served at a school, having a box lunch breakfast, we don't have to pay for the staff to be there, but we will make do with the revenue we need. So there's little consequences to it. Obviously, you should consider obeying the program that the USDA is setting up for us, because if we don't meet these prices, the general fund has to subsidize it. We've had, remember this conversation about the subsidy? However, we are already subsidizing it. So at some point we are hoping, we have some plans. You've heard some, we've increased participation here at the high school and the elementary schools, and we're working on the program, and at some point I'm really hoping to work with Phil, our food service director, to your bread and butter for supporting programs at the high school
A ton.
is really to work here to improve our revenue and sales with different offerings.
So my question is, I'm not worried about the people who can afford to buy lunch. 25 cents a day is a big sum of money. And I'm not worried about the people who get free lunch. What happens to the people who get reduced lunch?
It's still the same 40 cents.
It's the free and reduced prices remain the same.
They're set by the government.
So this would not be an
Yeah.
increase to the reduced lunch
And
price?
that's technically why we recommend it, because those individuals that are struggling have a protective measure there. And that's not changing. So, and we could talk about some of the guidelines and what makes it, how do you qualify and all that those other items. And there's levels. So, looking at other schools' pricing, and this is just meeting what the USDA recommends. We're not looking to make additional funds to help cover the program, so we won't be subsidized. Our idea of getting out of the general fund subsidy is improving our offerings and providing attractive options for students throughout the day that will make more money for the program and increase participation, which is kind of how you want to solve that problem, not with just, the average meal price.
That's not happening in the elementary schools.
It's really difficult because the elementary schools don't have that kind of a palette, so we're not going to have really unique offerings that will inspire student to be like, oh, I want one of those today instead of the regular lunch meal, right? And there's been a lot of testing. We have an educational program, that we're working on in the elementary schools, but to raise funds in these small schools, like drastically change the revenue forecast, that's really difficult. So, what if you focus on the high school, I can actually have more revenue for the program to improve the elementary school offering. So if you're going to focus your attention on raising revenue, which is different than expending, I can raise revenue in a high school that will directly affect the quality of what we can do at the elementary schools, because it's the whole program. Does that make sense? Because the budget is different. Where we spend the money and improve the program, the high school is essentially subsidizing all the elementary schools. So we want to, and that's where we have the most students, and the wider palette, broader palette to attract. And breakfast is a great option for that. We're not doing much for breakfast at the high school, so that's a huge opportunity here to, boost revenue. So those are the things we're looking at and how to do that, which includes the design, changing a little bit of the flow of when kids enter the building. It's not, you don't walk right into that area. So there are things that we're discussing, like how can we increase participation here? And of course, that will affect the quality. As the program begins to pay for itself, it improves the quality throughout the whole program.
I've heard on the news that FDA is requiring more fruits and fresh vegetables, and their schools are claiming that the cost of providing the fresh is more than the amount that they've adjusted how much the federals are contributing.
Talking with our food service director, there definitely are a lot of change guidelines here, like going to a complete whole wheat crust on pizza and things like that. We have seen a dramatic drop in participation in lunch programs because of the nature of these requirements. That's true. It doesn't necessarily affect all of our a la carte offerings though. It doesn't change the fact we could serve eggs in different areas for breakfast and have to-go lunches. So we could use that as an excuse, but I prefer here your participation is already very low. If we're looking at the program to keep it, then we really have to start making our, focus on breakfast. And so there are ways that we're trying to change that subsidy. I believe next year it's $25,000 is coming out of the general fund to subsidize food services. Even this increase in pricing, which it's not going to solve our problem. Right? It's a minimal increase. And this is just on the meals.
Christine?
I see lunches every day in a different school. However, I also know what my daughter's choices are. And the part of the serving size and how they have to like manage that so much because of the governmental guidelines, and you have to have a certain amount of this and that, and I'm not seeing a lot of food on kids' plates, and I understand that we have this epidemic of overweight children, and that's where their focus is. However, pizza twice in 1 week doesn't seem very, healthy either. So I don't know. I'm on the fence on this one.
Any other comments?
Well, we have talked before about the fact that if we're going to subsidize something, let it be this, let it be our students' lunches. So, we want to continue to do that. How will that really, that won't affect what you have to offer. If you subsidize it.
It reduces your
it's
revenue.
there.
So your subsidy's about 25,000. So we already subsidize, so not doing the USDA guideline really doesn't penalize us because we're penalizing ourselves. So you're right. It will affect the revenue you take in. We can't exceed in our budget, so our revenue. So let's say we budgeted, I'll just use it, $609,000 for food services, but our revenue is not going to be able to cover that, including the $25,000 subsidy, because that's considered revenue for the program. Then as we go through the year, we need to make a cut. We can't come in at 609,000. I don't have a fund balance. So we talked a little bit of fund balance. There's no equity in the program to borrow from if you don't make it. So I have to let someone go. Or we have to cut down on one of, there's not much here you can cut into like servings. I could use more government commodities. I could, and we're already cutting, we're at bare bones staff. And as a matter of fact, we already have an issue with block scheduling. We have to add a half an hour, so we're already having people coming in at different times to cover that additional half hour of lunchtime they're getting at the middle school. So we're working on that right now. It's not an easy issue. These are extremely low prices for the lunches that we offer. It doesn't affect free and reduced lunch. So those are the facts that you're dealing with. And we will adjust the program accordingly.
Okay.
How much is breakfast?
It's like $1.25, but I can look it up. It's online. All of our lunch prices are online. Breakfast is not changing, so if it's $1,
So it's just lunch that's changing.
yep.
But this won't make up that difference or exceed the 25,000?
When we approached the board earlier this year, we talked about waiting to make this increase because we didn't want to disrupt the school year. So it's something that we knew we were going to have to tackle now. It could affect our revenue. We've lost a couple people, so we can try to hire for less, I guess, things like that. But again, if you're looking to improve the quality of the program, reducing your revenue in your budget does not help that. So.
This isn't reducing, it's just not increasing. It's not increasing the revenue.
Right, but the cost of food goes up, salaries increase, so expenses are more.
So it does.
So it impacts the bottom line.
And you know this too, just from your home expenses. We've all felt this from gas to food. So the program suffers from that too, and we have cut back. In some elementary schools, you only have, in one, we know we're only going to be able to do a box service. So.
Any further talk or discussion on this? Okay. Set this aside for action separately. Item 15. So now we're looking at item 12J, approved tuition rates for 2014-15 school year. I think there's a document in here regarding tuition.
It's on the back of the lunch.
Mike, were you able to get some history for me?
I do have, just for a little bit, I can go back to how we set this. I used the same format assuming it was approved by the DOE, for calculating your tuition as you did in the prior year, which is simply
What were the numbers in the prior year?
2014. Just bear with me. Opening up Word.
I think it was 15,000.
Oh, well, it was for elementary. So see how we have a breakout here, high school, middle, and elementary?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about this.
The high school number was 17,725.
17.
The middle school number was 17,247. And the elementary number was 15,460.
Those were last year's.
That was the current fiscal year, 2014.
High school is 17,275?
725.
725.
Is that because of the change in the number of students?
All those factors. It could be, I mean, think about our elementary too. If I had a student come in with an extreme device, and we have very small populations at these schools, so I might have a $10,000 expenditure increase for that location.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Student size changes, it's both factors.
What was for 2013?
For high school, 15,952,
Middle school
14,111,
and elementary school?
15,988. So you can see,
2012.
this moves around quite a bit.
The third year prior, 2012?
I have to search for that, I don't have a memo for that. If you like, I can research all those and put them in a little spreadsheet for your perusal.
Well, we're gonna take action on this evening, that's why I wanted to see prior 3 years for this evening.
So this is
So you got-
literally just a straight off calculation.
You do have
by
the
DOE.
3-year history, give me a second, I can search for those.
The numbers indicate to me, since we're talking about this now, that with a increase in average cost per student, that the overhead that exists continues to exist, but the number of students that we have continues to drop, which is why the cost per student is going up. Interestingly, that's not the case with the elementary school. It's going down slightly. And I wonder if we could have some comment as to why you speculate that would be the case. The middle school, of course, is going up from 2013, which it was 14,111. 14, it went to 17,247, and then this year it's 18,000, proposed at 194, 18,194.
I have the FY12 rates if you want them.
Please, what is the high school?
High school, 16,494.
Okay.
Middle school, 15,480.
Okay.
Elementary school, 16,091.
Any idea, I remember that number. Any idea why the elementary school would be dropped?
Well, there's only two ways it would drop. Increase in enrollment or a decrease in expenditures. So I could easily chart that on those numbers, looking at DOE numbers for years. I don't know, if you want, I could chart, show you enrollment and expenditures. So that's the only two pieces of this equation. So either your cost for elementary is dropping, which we know there's been an effort here to do that. So I would venture that it could be a little bit of both, right? So we're controlling some costs, and if you look at it from 2012, you had a professional staff reduction, 11 to 12, right? And then I'd have to, chart the enrollment as well, but it could be a little bit of both happening at the elementary level.
So remember too, it's as you hire staff, if staff are different, they take different health insurance, all that's gonna impact I would also add that, remember, for next year's tuition rate, it's really based on what is budgeted, not what's spent. So knowing, like at the high school, we know we have 3 positions that we haven't filled. So that's money that's budgeted, but likely won't be spent. We know we budgeted 9-point-something% increase in health insurance that we didn't incur. So that won't be, you know what I mean? So all those things play into that, what was budgeted, but may not be spent.
So these numbers are, I'm just trying to get a history of how these numbers are created. So it's is it basically just set on how much it's gonna cost, basically, to run the school, and then divide it up per student?
I can even be more specific than that. It's very simple how this school district sets those rates. You take the general fund budget in its entirety, divide it by your October 1st enrollment. The general fund portion, so food service is not included, right? But transportation's in that. Schools do a few different things with this, and then what do they use for their enrollment figures? Some just go straight with the DOE cost per pupil from the prior year. In Dover, we used the prior year's cost per pupil from the DOE 25, our financial report, and increased it by the amount that our budget increases. So there's other things you can do with that. This school district, it's a very simple way of calculating. I take the general fund budget, I break it up by level. 1, 2, 3. So you notice in our account structure, we have our locations are determined by 2 digits, a level and a building. So you have 1, and 1 is the high school, 2 middle school, 3, 5, 3, 5, and 7, 6, and those are our elementary schools. So I just take the general fund budget, which we have no district-wide location. So all of our expenditures have been proportioned out by level, so it's a very simple calculation for us. I say what are expenditures by level, and then divide that by the October 1st enrollment. It's that simple.
The October 1st, 2013.
Correct. Which is the closest reporting number, I
It's
think.
like a year behind.
And typically, we would bring these rates to you around April-ish. We still have, we're in negotiations, and there's been other things that we could look at. There's other factors which warrant maybe waiting a little bit to set these this year, but now we're in that pivotal, we need to set the rate.
So this, in terms of teacher salary then, is only based on the current?
What we budgeted
Current
for.
contract.
That warrant article is not in the budget.
Any increase?
We budgeted for the support staff. That 100,000, I think, was brought up tonight, right? That was approved in the budget. So the budget that was approved by the voters, we voted on. So it was, you had a budget committee budget, a school board budget, a default budget. That general fund budget that was voted in, that is adopted for next year. There could be changes to it. We could have another vote on a teacher's contract. That could happen. But that's not how we're setting these rates. So